Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Pichette. I am a businessman. I've spent most of my life building, running large companies. You've heard a second ago, I was the Chief Financial Officer at Google from 2008 to 2015, which was a hyper-growth phase of the company. And I'm here to talk to you about profit maximizing. And the reason why I'm here to talk to you today, I took a bunch of notes and I want to make sure that I stay on my script because I have a tendency to ramble and meander. So I've just made sure that I'm going to follow my script. So if you don't mind, I'll take a look at my phone a few times. Here's what we're living in today. We're living in a world, when I left Google, we had $65 billion of cash on the balance sheet, which was one of my jobs, portfolio management. And today, Google has over $100 billion on its balance sheet. Just think of that for a sec. Apple has over $100 billion of cash on its balance sheet. That's a pretty good profit maximizing proxy. And yet, we know that we have a world that has all these challenges. And there seems to be a dichotomy there. And this is why I'm here to talk to you today. I want to talk about this issue of profit maximizing. And in fact, before we talk about the future of corporations and how they should look like and what our endeavor, I think it's really important to go back 50 years. Almost to the day, 50 years ago, there was a really influential article in the New York Times, and I'll give you the title of that article. It was about the social responsibility of business. And the title of the article is, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." That was Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, wrote this article, became incredibly influential. Actually, there's an entire doctrine from the University of Chicago, which is the Friedman Doctrine, that basically said, and again, in his own words, there's only one and only one social responsibility of the business: to use its resource and engage in activities designed to create its profit so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engage in open and free competition without deception and fraud. That's the last 50 years. He was an advisor to Ronald Reagan. He was an advisor to Margaret Thatcher, all the liberalism that we've seen from them. And yet, 50 years later, and by the way, we've seen unbelievable wealth creation in the world in the last 50 years, and I don't want to discount that. If I had the choice to live 50 years ago or today, from a technology and availability perspective, clearly today is better. And I always say, do you want to be the king of France 300 years ago, or do you want to be, the average Joe today? You know the answer to that as well. So technology has been a huge force for the good. But in that doctrine has fundamental flaws. There's been a lot of critics around them, but I want to come back to you, I have just a few minutes, on three main points that actually has made this theory flawed. The first one we know very well because there's a huge crisis around us, and it has to do with the environment. The fundamental issue with the environment is that economists and market forces, the free market does not know how to price the environment. Every ton of CO2 that you generate every day is not priced in your everyday life. Every piece of plastic that actually you consume is not priced appropriately. Why? Because in many cases, they are free resources in terms that they're so cheap to extract, and they have massive benefits in the short term, but the true cost of them are not embedded in them. And our planet is basically suffering from it. The true cost of plastic, if you really put it on, right, you'd probably use 1/10 of the plastic you use today. The second one is the issue of technological progress and how it's actually skewed wealth creation. So we have to recognize that in the last 50 years, we went through a completely technological revolution, like a second industrial age, which is the digital age. And that digital age has created massive amounts of positive impact, but also an enormous change in terms of creation of wealth and concentration of it. We're witnessing today, for example, I'm Canadian, but I lived the last 10 years, I've just moved here a year ago in the US. essentially the failure of the American dream now. So there's two sources that I'd love to, if you haven't read them, they're really worth reading. Piketty is a famous economist here in Europe who wrote about the history of the concentration of wealth, the Gilded Age in the 19th century, what happened in the early 20th, and what's happened in the last 50 years. And essentially, he's basically made the postulate and statistical evidence to prove that we're actually reconcentrating wealth like we had in the 19th century. And then you may know, I'm a big fan of a man called Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is one of the richest men in America. He's a hedge fund manager. He runs Bridgewater. And Ray wrote this beautiful piece that I encourage you to read on his LinkedIn called, Why Capitalism is Failing Right Now. So the title of it, I think, is, let me just find it because it's actually really good. I don't have it with me here, but if you go to see Ray Dalio, essentially what and this is one of the richest guys in America who's made a ton of money, and he's basically saying, we have a problem right now in America, and I think we have a problem in general in the Western world, which is he is of a humble background, and there was actually a way to the middle class and the middle class to grow. And he's showing through a lot of statistics that this wealth creation but concentration is actually breaking the American dream, and I think the American dream is broadly defined as, the Western world equality of opportunity. And so we have a second set of issue there that we have to actually assess. And finally, we have to recognize that we're also at a time of technological change that's somewhat unprecedented. And what I'm talking about, these changes of wealth creation and concentration, is in fact on the way to accelerate. Because with big data, with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, and all the new waves of robotics and miniaturization, and this next wave of technology is going to change the world again. But again, will most probably create these monopolies that concentrate a massive amount of wealth, as we see already today. If you look at, again, I lived in Silicon Valley for a decade. At the beginning of this year, 2019, with just the IPOs that we had in Silicon Valley, hundreds of millionaires, just in one city, because of this concentration of wealth. So those are the forces that are actually shaping the world today. Whether we like them or not, that's what's happening. And to me, what I find amazing is it's also a time of amazing opportunity. So I told you about Friedman. I think we know that because of these forces, we need new models. And this is why I'm talking to you today. I think it's really an amazing opportunity today to seize the moment in a couple of ways. One is set new corporate structures that recognize that the Friedman doctrine is a failure. And this is why you're here today, and this is why you're exchanging on this issue. We do need a much better balance, a recognition that the environment is a stakeholder that's just as precious as our employees, our communities, and our shareholders. And I've been a big supporter, I'll talk to that in a minute, about Earthjustice. I don't know if you know, when I lived in the US, and I continue to do so. The motto of Earthjustice, which is an offshoot of Greenpeace, it's just a bunch of lawyers. And its motto is, because the planet needs a good lawyer. And so they raise money and they sue the US government. And that's all they do, which is super cool. Because they stop all of kind of this short-term profit maximizing, because the planet thinks not in terms of this quarter and next quarter, it thinks in terms of centuries and millennia. We need corporate structures and pricing that truly embed the true costs of the economic activities that we do. Look, it's not enough to be a B Corp. What's really important is that if we're a B Corp, or if we take a different corporate structure, it is super important that as a community, we recognize the true costs that we impose, and that we actually make sure that these costs are transparent to our consumers, our users, our community. Like you don't see it with me, but in my backpack, I had my down puffy got stolen, so my community work is working, right? So I wasn't good enough to hold on my puffy, so somebody else needed it. So, and but I bought my next one. I bought from Patagonia, specifically not because they're a B Corp, and it's costing me probably 25% more to buy that puffy. It's because the true costs are embedded into that puffy. The polyester is recycled polyester, so it didn't create any more polyester in the world. And the down is actually from recycled down so that you don't have to pluck live animals anymore. So we all have a responsibility to say, yeah, I know it's 20% higher, but it's the true price for an ecosystem that actually is much fair. And then finally, I just want to, on that topic, I just want to say that B Corp is not necessarily the end all. I think we have to be open-minded. I'll give you an example. I'm chairman of a company called Lightspeed Retail. Lightspeed Retail is a point-of-sale business that is operating to help high street commerce essentially compete with Amazon and the big giants in a way that they can actually be very successful. And they have a restaurant point-of-sale business, and they have this amazing product. And they offer it to every merchant that they sign on in every restaurant, which is, if they'll give you the point of sale, if you agree that for every one of your invoices that you actually print, we'll plant one tree. And so they've planted hundreds of thousands of trees around the world through this initiative where they subsidize these nonprofits to make sure that actually we're doing, social good at the same time. So my only point is, Lightspeed is another example of, they're not a B Corp right now. They're assessing if they should be a B Corp. They're exploring the issue. I'm chairman of the board, so I'm pushing for it. But at the same time, there are so many ways that we can actually be much more responsible, and we should look at all these ideas. The other piece of the puzzle that I want to raise with you today is the following. We're all running businesses, and we're all encouraging businesses to become B Corps. But I want to actually open with you today a second chapter that's just as important, is you're all leaders in your community. If you're here, it's because you're a leader. And in that, I think that we also have to recognize that by our actions, our individual actions, we speak, like we walk around like a megaphone. And I think that not only do we need a corporate structure that actually answers these needs, but we need our own personal agenda. And I want to share with you 4 core principles that I drive my life with. Because I know everybody watches me every day. But it's not because they watch me every day. It's because that's what I do. But when I do it, I actually tell people I do it so that I inspire them. So first, I encourage everybody to have a plant-based diet. Because if you look at all of the elements that we can do to actually help the environment, on the top 5, anywhere, any scientist will tell you, plant-based diet is a huge lever for the world, apart from all the other ethical issues. 2, I support environmental and animal rights groups. The environment needs a good lawyer. Animals need a good lawyer. And so that's what I do in my day-to-day life. I mean, we've been a huge supporter of Earthjustice, as I told you, and my family and I, just a couple of years ago, we had an opportunity. We're from Canada. There was this massive territory. Allow me 10 seconds. Just outside of Montreal, there's this massive territory, 260 square kilometers of land with 30 lakes. It was given by the King of France, Louis XIV, to the first Archbishop of New France in 1674 as his feudal seigneurial land. And some complete historical accident, this thing has been buried for 350 years. And it resurfaced and was put up on auction a couple of years ago. You could just imagine, this is an hour away from Montreal, 65,000 acres. Every developer showed up to put 1 million condos on it. I sat down with my kids. I said, sorry, I'm just spending all of your inheritance. And they said, good job, Dad. So now it's essentially a private national park that we're working to give back to Nature Conservancy for the community. Not only am I proud of the partners with whom I've done this, I'm just telling people look at you every day and the actions you take and what you stand for. The other thing that I actually encourage everybody to do, which is again in contradiction to the B Corp conversation we're having in some ways, I think we should be conservationists and minimalists. I've had the great fortune of traveling. After I finished Google, I traveled the world for 2 years, literally nonstop. Got a good backpack, a good pair of hiking boots, my puffy that I got stolen, and we just traveled the world. And I remember on the first trip back home, I opened my drawer, I walked into our closet. I had lived with 1 t-shirt, 1 pair of underwear, 2 pair of underwear. And, because you need to rotate. And, I mean, some people just wash overnight, but anyways, TMI, I know. I walked back into my closet, and the first thing that popped into my head, having, crossed Africa, crossed India, what is all this? Zero correlation to happiness, I guarantee you. Being a minimalist is a good thing for the planet. Doesn't mean we don't do commerce, but we should think about that balance. Then finally, I think we just need to nourish our body and our soul all the time, and because that's where I find most of my happiness with my family, friends, and community. So if everyone invests in these kind of few simple rules and find your own, make sure that you communicate them to the world, because that's the equilibrium that us as leaders people will look at. How we run our companies, what kind of corporate structures we set up, what are the principles by which we will abide, but just as important, how do we live our own principles and how do they marry and reconcile? And this is how you know you've done the full job at it. I think, I need to tell you, these 4 principles, I told you that I'm the chairman of Lightspeed Retail. The CEO of Lightspeed Retail, his name is Dax Da Silva, phenomenal human being. He wrote a little book called The Age of Union. That's what's written in the back of the book. Here's the 4 things you should do. I just happened to be doing what Dax was doing. So we're already a community out there. So all this to say, Friedman was completely wrong. The economic growth would have happened anyways. There are smarter mousetraps. There is better governance. There is a ton of place for not only what we're exploring today, but more innovation in that space. This is our time. It is our duty to make sure that, and it is mine as a VC, every time I have a conversation with a new potential investor, I tell them, tell me about your corporate governance. Have you considered a B Corp? Once you're the next Google and you have $100 billion on your balance sheet, will you have the courage to let it go to the community? These are the conversations I'm having. And because you're taking these actions today, and I want to thank you for it, we together will be in a position so that 50 years from now, some kid will be on this stage saying, I don't know who thought of all this stuff we're doing, but hopefully to say, that was a good idea, and they did much better than the prior 50 years. Thank you so much for the invitation.